Cool. All right. Let's do this thing.
Nice one. Thanks so much, Brett. Stop that music. Okay, so this is a webinar on how to localize software without breaking your designs. Yeah, we often see from our customers that they need more context, or that the translation and localization process happens way too late. By the time QA has happened, by the time the whole development process is finished, then starting localization. And the good thing about starting localization at the design stage means that you can skip all of this process. It takes a lot less time. And that's what I'm going to be showing you today, how it integrates with Figma and how we can integrate with Localize, and then also a code repository a little bit later as well. This will be a webinar mostly for, starting at the basic level, starting at the very beginning of using Localize, but I still think there'll be nuggets of information of people that are already utilizing the Figma integration with Localize. So I still think we'll get some use out of it, but it is going to be mainly focused on that process. So if you've had a demo from us before, or if you're already using it, it may be that it's not as useful for it as it is for all of the people that aren't currently using our Figma integration and plugin. Okay, so today you've just got me, which is a very heavily edited version of a very old photo. I wish I looked like this now. But you've also got our global support team as well, and everyone at Localize behind us as well. So if you are in the application, maybe you've taken out a trial, or maybe you're already a customer, you'll know that you've got the chat in the bottom right of the widget. But then we also have the email address, the traditional email address that you can get your questions into. So yeah, as I've mentioned today, we're going to be going through very basically what Localize is and what it does. We'll go through a high level what the Localize continuous design-led workflow is going to offer you in terms of the workflow, and explain it a little bit. And then we're going to dive into what it actually looks like when we actually do this from scratch. And then hopefully we've got time at the end for a little Q&A. If we don't have time for it, then maybe we can follow up with any questions that we can't get to after as well. So I think I've been through this a little bit more, but who is this for? This is mostly for designers and product managers, but anyone that's really working within localization could benefit from this, especially when we talk about app and software localization. And because we're going to be mostly talking about how Figma can integrate with Localize and then the code repositories, it's going to be covering kind of everything, but those are mostly who this session is going to be for. And the goal is, hopefully, as I've already said, to create and optimize a design-led localization workflow using Localize, how we're going to set up Figma in order to be successful here, and also how we can leverage automations, which is basically what happens to keys when they reach Localize. So we've got a few methods of translating and localizing content in Localize. We've also got some key features to show you, and how they can also combine to give the best possible outcome of machine and AI translations. So hopefully everyone here is at least a little bit familiar with Localize, but ultimately Localize is just a TMS that allows you to translate content all in one place, no matter what the source is. So if it's content stored in a CMS for a website, if you've got emails that need to be translated, if you've got your software, mobile applications, games, it can all allow you to do it all in one place, right? So instead of using maybe Google Doc or an Excel spreadsheet, and these are all flying all over the place, getting checked by this, that, and the other, what we do with Localize is, combine it all into one place, allowing you to add context, those style guides that I've already mentioned, glossaries, and also can utilize AI, again, to make things much faster, a lot more automated, and speed up the process so that you're not waiting around for localization, because we do hear from a lot of our prospective customers that this can be a bottleneck. So What usually happens when I'm talking to prospective customers or even customers is that it's just an inefficient workflow. And we can use what I've got on screen now to kind of show the basics of what this localization workflow looks like before and also after using Figma in the process too. Because the localization or translation process usually starts with new content or content that's been updated in the past, right? So yeah, it's nothing other than those two. Something needs translating, and the source is supplied to maybe a translation vendor, maybe even a TMS as well. And this can be done using the resource file, right, that you've already hopefully done through the internationalization process. And that could be the form of a JSON file if it's a web project, or a localization strings file for iOS, or an XML file for Android, or integration content, maybe even a Word doc. But this content is stored in a source somewhere. Even if you're using Localize, you can still upload this to Localize in this format. You can still send that to a translator, that's fine. But with Localize, it allows you to pre-translate the content on your side, which, through the use of automations, we can apply translation memories, apply then machine translation as a fallback, or we can use Localize AI with automations as well. I'm going to show you all of this a little bit later. Then you translate the content, whether through human translation or through machine translation or Localize AI. It gets translated and then hopefully goes through a review phase as well. So you know exactly that whoever this content is for, maybe you've got someone in the Spanish market where I am who can look over the content, make sure that it's final, and then deliver the content, right? This could be, if it's very, very manual and basic, it could be copying and pasting a lot from Word docs and Excel docs into a resource document, into a CMS. And even if you are using a TMS already, or even if you're using Localize without the Figma plugin already, it can still be a fairly manual process. And what the Figma plugin can do is, as I've said, can just start the process way earlier on in the workflow, almost at the same time as development. So as development of the application starts, localization can also start at the same time. Because the content is already ready, we know that what the copy in the application is going to be. Localization can begin there. Then we go through the same process. Content comes from Figma. It gets translated in Localize using translation memories. And translation memories, basically, if you're not aware, is just like a combination of all of the translations that have been done by you before and have been approved by you before. So we translate it, machine translation, Localize AI, translation, whether that's internally on your side, through a localization or translation vendor, it doesn't matter. But through the translation platform, like Localize, reviewed, published, and delivered to the code repository, which is what we're going to do today. Hopefully that's clear. And yeah, we can jump already straight into the demo. We will have a Q&A after, but I think we can jump into the demo now. And this is quite typical here of what we see our customers having. Text that after it's been through that full process of translation and localization, then doesn't fit in a button or in a headline over 2 lines. And that's what we're going to look at today. This could be your first look at Localize, but this is the Localize platform. This is our dashboard. This is where I've got lots and lots of different projects for different things that I have on at Localize. Being a sales engineer at Localize, I'm constantly doing demos and have to have an integration or a project for each integration that Localize can offer, which is why I have it set up like this. But the good thing about Localize as well is that you can have as many projects as you want. So if you've got maybe 10 different modules in your application, you can have 10 different projects to separate these off. So it just allows you to kind of siphon off all of the different types of content that you have. Maybe you've got a marketing project and you've got an application project. It just allows you to separate this content a little bit. We can see at a glance certain information about a project. This is the one that we're going to be using today, so there's nothing in it right now. But the one underneath, we know that everything's translated, which is really good. And if we want to see a little bit more information about each of these projects, then we can expand them and see at the granular level how much is needed for each of the different languages in our project as well. Over on the left here, we can see some information as well, which applications we're using. By applications, I mean Localize apps. So our integrations, we can also go very quickly to different parts of the project, like the download button within the project. We can also add a language as well. But as I said, today we're going to be focusing mainly on this demo project, of which there is nothing in it. So a few things that I've got set up already are, as I've already mentioned and talked about, are the automations. Now, right now, in my automations, I have a bunch of different languages in this project already. I think there's about 9 languages. And most of them are going to be going through kind of my standard process, which would be to apply the translation memory first with all 100% matches. So anything that's been translated in the past in another project or had been deleted, it's still contained in Localize, and it can be pre-populating those matches so that we know that this is content that is potentially reviewed, and we can even give it a custom status as well that we can then act on later. And it may be worth remembering that this reviewed status is going to be those keys are going to be treated differently when we translate the content later, because right now these keys are going to be marked as reviewed, but the secondary option, if as a fallback to those 100% matches, is going to be a 95% match or 90% match. Maybe there's just 1 or 2 words changed in the string versus the previous version. We can still utilize that content, but we still need to make changes. So this isn't a reviewed key. This is actually going to be marked as unverified and given an amber status, a fuzzy match status. Then, as a fallback to that, let's say it's completely new content. It's a new version of the application or a new version of a website, whatever the content is. The fallback is going to be, in this case, DeepL. But we've also got different options here, like Localize AI, for example, which is a different alternative to machine translation. We all know what Google Translate and DeepL Translate can do. Very, very, very efficient translations, but doesn't always take into account context, doesn't always take into account glossaries. So what Localize AI can do is take those things into account. It takes into account your translation memory. If there's content that's similar, it's going to reuse it and apply it correctly into the translation. It's also going to take into account a glossary, which I've not got to yet, but it's next on my agenda. And it's going to take into account a style guide, all of which would be uploaded beforehand. And what our style guide does, it's like a brand guidelines, right? So if you know that in who your audience is going to be, if it's going to be a tech audience or if it's going to be a marketing audience or, a professional audience, we can give it that information. In fact, we can go to our style guides now and show you what one of these may look like. I think I actually generated these using AI, so it's AI marking its own homework. But when we upload it, we can either use this as a general guide for all languages, or we can do language specific guides as well. So if certain markets have maybe a different feel about the content, Localize AI is going to take this into account and apply it to the translations, which is just something that, at least through Localize, Google Translate and DeepL Translate can't do. When you upload a style guide to Localize using our upload style guide button, it creates a summary for us, and we can see exactly what is prompting the AI engine. Question I often get when I say that is, which engine are we using? Currently, we are using GPT-4o, but that's soon going to change, and I'm not going to give away the information on a webinar here about future product releases, but stay tuned for that one. But you can see what's being affected here: our tone of voice, who the audience is, the level of formality, any general rules for all of the languages, do's and don'ts, basically just giving it as much information at this point as possible in order to get the best translations, right? Because that's obviously what we're trying to do here. So, um, what I'm trying to show here is that for these languages, that's what's going to happen. We're going to apply the translation memory. We're going to apply maybe some fuzzy matches, and then we're going to use either Localize AI or machine translation. Then maybe for another language, we want to have a different automation. So in the case of maybe our regionless English content, we need this changed for the Australia market, maybe a currency thing. It may be just general colloquialisms around the Australia market. But what this is going to do, what this specific automation is going to do, is going to insert the monitored language. So it's going to copy the English standard regionless English to the target language of English Australia, translating it, but just copying it over so that then someone can have a look and go over it and make sure that it's ready for the Australia market. Again, this content is going to be unverified. I'll also apply a status to this too. Then for, let's say, one other language, I just wanted to show you that indicate that different languages can have different workflows attached to them. And maybe because I know that DeepL doesn't support Thai, I'm going to use Google for this one. The reason I'm not using Localize AI at this point, and I'll maybe show you how it works a little bit later, is just that it just takes slightly longer than Google Translate does. And on a demo like this, you want things to happen fast. And by slightly longer, I mean maybe a couple of minutes instead of a couple of seconds. So it's not like it's not like we'll be waiting a long time, but I want things to happen snappy. Okay, so glossaries. A glossary is basically just going to be your terminology for all of the different languages within that's important to your business. So right now, what's important to Localize is very much that we keep Localize as Localize. It's not going to be translated by Localize AI with a different spelling because it sees it maybe as a spelling mistake or something. We do get that a lot. But this is a non-translatable term. But it could be that for certain versions or certain terms that we do need a translation, and those can be offered if we want to, with a brief description. Again, Localize AI takes this into account, but also any human that's translating or reviewing the content will also get access to this if the terminology is within the key that they're translating and reviewing. And this is all going to come together very soon, trust me. And the last thing I've got set up in this project already is that I have a contributor here. Now, this is our new beta version of contributors. So if you are a customer, it may look a little bit different. You may be seeing a little bit of what's to come. But ultimately, it allows us to have access control over each of the different people that are working within a project. So obviously, me as the team owner, I can see and do everything. But then my translator, who just still happens to be me, is only allowed to edit the Spanish language and only able to read the English and the Spanish versions. But given that I very much trust Joe here, I've allowed this person to, add and edit glossary terms as and when they feel is needed as well. Just shows you that we can have different options for different users. And you can do this at the contributor level, at the singular contributor levels, or with groups of people, which would save you time and efficiencies. Right, there's nothing else in this project that I've got left set up. So let's say we are creating something new for our application in Figma. This is our design. We're very happy with this design and we want to translate it. So we can do that with Localize. And instead of just passing this design to the developers at this point, let me show you what we can do. Once we open up the Localize plugin, we are greeted with this. You would, if for the first time, have a authorization that you would have to go through if you've never used it before. But since I have gone through that process, it takes about 30 seconds. So you're not gonna be waiting a while. And because I've already got my project set up, I've got my demo project here. This is the one I'm going to be sending the content to. The design language here is in English, which is the same as the source language in my Localize project. And this is actually going to be for a web project, but it could easily be for iOS and Android. Now, one thing that's very important is the naming of the keys. So because we're going to be pushing this content to Localize and then the repository, we are effectively taking away the onus of naming keys from the developers or from an automation made by the developers to the designers. So this is something that is a big change in the process of the development, but one that is a necessary in order for us to start adding the content to these files, as I'll show you later. For me, what makes the most sense is that it's just the element name that's the key name, which is over here. So I'm going to use the elements name, as my key naming pattern, but we do have a bunch of pre-built ones. And if you want to, you can create a custom one. And even if you really didn't want to, you could still have the developers creating these. Do not generate the name and do this manually for every key, which probably isn't ideal, but still possible if you want to do that. When I finish the setup, I can then start to select content. Obviously, I can just click export all and it's going to export everything to Localize. But if I actually just select the content, you can already start to see the structure of my JSON file in this case, but of your resource file, because you've got the key name and you've got the copy that's going to be translated. So certain things here that I actually don't need for translation, right? So this isn't a translatable term, so I can just click this X and get rid of it. So only things that actually need translation are going to be within my resource file. So I've got my resource file kind of structure already here. And when I click export, we'll see a few more settings here. One that I'm going to focus on are that we can add tags, which may be important later for filtering content, whether within a localized application or on the download to the repository. We can add a tag here if we want to. Let's actually add today's date. Why not? And we can also assign this to a file. If there already is content in my localized project, which in this case there isn't, we can add it to it. So basically, if the file is stored on the repository, the resource file, let's say an en.json file is on the repository, this is already synced with Localize. We can be adding keys to that eventual resource file from here. But in this case, I've got no content in my project in Localize yet, so I'm going to be creating it from scratch. And when I use this placeholder, it basically means because I'm pushing English content, en is going to be called en.json as the source content. And then for every target language, it's going to be ES or FR, and so on for all the different languages. And it's going to be just using this placeholder in Localize. So when I export, what's happening is creating the keys in Localize one by one based on what we've sent. It's also running those automations for all of those languages. In this case, it's going to be Google Translate or DeepL. And it's also uploading the screenshots to Localize. So because when you're using maybe a Word document, you have to maybe take a screenshot manually and upload it to the document. You don't have to do any of that with the Localize plugin. What this just done is uploaded all of that content together with the screenshot and matched it up in Localize with the text. So it gives the translators or the reviewers the best possible chance of getting the translation right. Okay, so if I return to the main page here, without even going into Localize at all, I already know that those automations have run. So I know that there's content translated in Localize. It may be machine translation, but it's there and it's been translated. So if I am to switch between these languages, we can already start to see where there are breakages in the design. So we may, want to just change the design a little bit to allow for a little bit longer sentence here, or we may want to allow to change the design here to a different language, to account for a different language with a longer character limit. Or what we can do as well is also maybe decide that it's not the designer that needs to change here, it's actually the translation. So we saw with these two keys maybe that we want to add a character limit here, and we absolutely can. And then if we are using Localize AI, it's going to take these into account as well. So if I just export that again, it's not going to duplicate these keys. It's just going to check what we've got in Localize. It's going to just update with the character limit, as we can see here. That's what's happened. So that's how we're not going to break the design, right? Because we already know that within a couple of seconds, we've got the translated versions right here. And we may want to fix this one. And again, it's then the designer's decision. Do I want to fix this myself, or do we put the onus on the translator to fix this? I see I probably got a question a while ago, but I'm still going to stop for it, given this is a good place to stop. What is the difference between automations and the new workflow functionality in terms of selecting correlated actions? First TM, then MT. The new workflow functionality is currently in private beta, so I don't want to talk about it too much, but they are going to be very, very similar. And there is talk that potentially well, it's not my announcement to make, but they're very, very similar. There's not much that's going to change there, but they do the same thing, right? Okay, so now because we've been working within Figma all of this time, and I know that those translations were created, I can go back to my translation interface in Localize, and we'll see the translations as they have come in. We can see the key name. This is a web key, so that we know that this key is for web. If it was for different platforms, then you can have a different key name per platform and still only have one key in Localize. Yeah, and then this is our tag that we created, and we can filter by that tag, as you can see. So if we've got a bunch of keys, we can filter only by the content we just sent. We know that this was from Figma. It's telling us that. We know that it's part of this file. And we've got the screenshot from Figma showing exactly where this text is. So we know that it's a kind of like a header for a form. This probably won't change this specific translation all that much, but it could change others. We have obviously all of the different versions here, so we can see English, Arabic, Australian English, Canadian French, and so on. And over here on the right, we can see comments for this specific key and specific language so that we can have a conversation with our translators or reviewers within the platform rather than going via email, sending new files, and so on. I want to make a change here. I can imagine that that gets quite painful. We also have our statuses, those custom statuses. So this is a 100% match, and this one is a machine translation, and this one is a fuzzy match. But we also have those other statuses. So this is mark as reviewed and mark as not reviewed, and this is verified and unverified. So these keys are reviewed already, unverified keys. And we can also, if we were to make a change, maybe we can use Localize AI for this. As we go through the translations, and I'll get a little bit further on, I'll show you how we do that, how we send this to translators. We do have over here the suggestions. So we've got Localize AI, so we can suggest some different variants for all of these translations and choose the right one that we want and save it. So if we want to, we can do that. We've also got shorten if it's a bit too long, rephrase, and we can add additional context here as well if we want to. But we also have the translation memory, and we've got the different options for machine translation as well. And for the translators out there, we've got the concordance search as well, so we can check all of our translation memories in one place too. If we do make a change, as I was saying, if we do make a change, we can see all of the different versions that there have been, and we can restore to a previous one too if we want to. Cool beans. Okay, so let's say at this point, okay, everything's been translated, but it's been translated by machine translation or Localize AI, and we want to get someone to look over this, maybe internally or externally, translation vendor. We can do that using tasks. And maybe we've also not used our automations for Localize AI. So if we don't use Localize AI for everything, maybe you don't want it to be automated all the time with using Localize AI or machine translation, we can still do it here if we want to for a specific subset of keys. So we send this to the Localize AI engine. We outline the scope. We can add additional instructions here, and if we want to, we can send everything, like in this case, and it gives us a little bit of knowledge as to how long this is going to take. This is 432 words, and it's going to take 9 minutes. And what I found from doing testing and using this is that 9 minutes is very conservative. It's probably going to be more like 2 or 3. And if we decide to send this to a human, maybe as a translator or as a reviewer, we have those two options, translation and review. And the only real difference between those two is that you can, as a reviewer, assign a reviewed status. And the reason that could be important is that maybe later down the line when we deliver this content to our repository, which is coming very shortly, once it's been reviewed, that could be the reason for that could be assigning that status. The reviewed status could be the trigger for the delivery to the repository. So obviously having that status and as a reviewed status, giving that maybe to an LSP that you've just started working with may not be ideal. So you may want to, reserve that for people that really know the product inside out and are working for you in market. But that's the only difference. It allows you the same access to Localize. But let's say we create a translation task, and last time with Localize AI, I was going to send everything, which is what is going to happen here. But actually, maybe we only want to filter out unverified keys. And what that does is it changes each language, only translating the content that needs to be. And by needs to be, I mean hasn't been applied automatically using those automations as a 100% match. So I don't know if you remember earlier, but I said it's going to be important later that these are marked as reviewed and these aren't. This is basically what I was talking about. So everything now for English, Australia, French, Canadian, and Thai pretty much is all going to be translated. But then for French, German, and Italian, maybe I've done this content before and only 3 words need to be translated. If you saw earlier that I've only got one Spanish translator, but if I did have assignees for all of these languages within my contributors panel, they would obviously be automatically assigned and I can create the task. All of this has been very manual so far, but basically everything in Localize is automatable using the API as a script function maybe, or with a future release coming soon in workflows. But yeah, you create the task, they log into Localize. They're likely going to see a stripped down version depending on what you've given them access to. So right now, obviously I'm an admin, but if I am a translator user, I may have a more stripped down version like this, where they only see and can edit the language of which they're relevant to. So I can't actually edit the English here in the bilingual view, only the target language. But I still have the screenshot and everything over here that I may need. But let's say they've finished their task, they've gone through every key one by one, they've finished close, they've pressed close task. We're now happy with the translation. So we made a change here. Let's say we did make a change because I think I changed it back. Let's use this one. So for the Canadian French, we've made a change. So before we deliver to the repository all of this content in the actual resource file that the application is going to use, we may want to just check that the design is right and everything is being translated within the design correctly. So we can obviously see here that it's not, but hopefully our translators have stayed within their character limitations, or we applied them correctly, which obviously I didn't for all of the keys. But let's say you did, and you're very happy with these translations. We then want to download this content to our repository. And because I've already got a repository connection for this project, I can go to file formats, select the file format that I need, which in this case is JSON, select the languages that I need, in this case, French, Canadian, Italian, and Spanish. I know exactly where on my repository these need to be stored, and I can use, if I want to, the filters to export only the content that I want to through using those tags, as I mentioned earlier, for a specific file like this one in this case, and using a particular translation status. So if you only want content that's gone through a board review, then of course we can apply that filter here. We make sure that we've got the correct app trigger set up and the repository that we want. And we can preview the content in Localize so we know exactly what this content is going to look like. But you can already see this is the content that was created from within Figma, right? So this JSON file was created from my Figma design rather than by a developer and way earlier on in the process. And yes, we're creating the translated versions here, but immediately as we push these keys to Localize, we can already create that JSON file as well, where we can add the content in English to our JSON file so that the developers don't need to. We can build only, which is basically just sending the pull request to the repository that this is completed, or we can build and download, which is going to build the pull request on the repository and also download to my local device. But with any luck, this has happened fairly quickly and I can go to my pull requests. It's not happened quite yet. Did I even press? No, did I press it? Not sure. But my pull request gets opened. I can go to my pull request. Here's one I created earlier, and we could see the translated files, again, that were created from Figma, translated in Localize, and then delivered back to our repository.
Joe, just while you're at a pause, you do have 2 questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure if you want to address them at the end or now, but up to you.
Yeah, we can definitely do them now. There's only a couple of things left to show anyway, but I'll answer these ones. When do you envision multi-projects on Figma plugin? I'm not entirely sure the context of this. When do you envision multi-projects on Figma plugin? If you could elaborate a little bit more, that would be cool. If you are a current customer or a new customer, or a prospective customer, that would also be good to know. How do you incorporate hyperlinks in this flow? Hyperlinks are a bit different. So within Figma, maybe it's not a hyperlink, but it's still a placeholder, right? So here I've got a standard placeholder that, is normal. You can log in to this application, first name. So what happens to this in Localize if we do use a placeholder here is that it looks like this in Localize. Let's find this, this key. So it creates the placeholder. So let's say if in this case, we've got we've just got one placeholder. And if this was a URL or a hyperlink to I meant the link below the sign-in. I meant the link below the sign-in. Is it what I'm talking about? Hopefully it's what you're talking about. If not, then if it's just what Localize is going to do is it's going to take into account just the plain text. So if there was a link here in Figma, it's just going to replace the text as it is here with underlined text. Any additional information in that key is not going to be taken into account. Below the login button, like this one. Basically, what Localize does is it takes the text away from Figma, it pulls it and pushes it into Localize, it gets translated and put back with the exact same formatting that it had with the translated languages. So if there is a URL within the Figma design, it's going to have it in the translated content too. Hopefully that answers. If going back to what I was saying about placeholders, even if it's different formatting, or if it's different placeholders, then these are still handled in the same way in Localize. So they're still blocks that can be copied across to our translatable content. So they're blocks. And then if we are using different platforms. So let's say in this case, this was pushed just as a web, but if this was for iOS and Android also, what Localize does on the export is it changes the placeholders or the formatting for each of the different platforms automatically. So iOS will have the iOS placeholder for first name in this case, and for Android as well, and for web also. So, Zhao, I understand now. Yeah, this is something that we're aware of. At the moment, only one project, as you can see, one project feeding our Figma file. You can only have one project to one file through the Figma plugin. Yeah, we're actually going to be looking hopefully soon on our Figma integration and making changes. So we're always welcome to hear feedback. No worries. It's not on the horizon just yet, though. And okay, so just a few other things, because I know that we're getting a bit close to the end. One thing that I didn't show already is that, yes, we can switch between the languages here, but that might be quite annoying sometimes. So what we can do is create versions for each of the languages within our project in Localize, and these are linked. So if I change to the Spanish version, you can click Update Page here, and it's going to update and pull in the latest translations from Localize. So if I want to make a change in Spanish for Spain, we can do. Let's make that change, save it, and then pull in, and we should get that change as we do here in Figma. So we've got the option for all of these as well. And if we want to as well, we can create one for key names too, which may be useful for the developers because they may not know what the key names are going to be. Obviously, having that will help them a lot. One other thing as well for any developers out there, if there are any, is probably what if we want to go by the traditional method, like by pulling in content from the repository as well. Maybe there's something that wasn't in the design, but is then in the resource document that we're adding all of this content to. What happens? So we can actually just add content to a file that's monitored by Localize. So let's do that. If I make a change or add content to this file, Localize is monitoring this file and pulls this content in using our out-the-box GitHub integration. While that's pulling in, it usually happens pretty quick, but I just see that I've got a question. What happens if you change source copy? This usually happens quite a lot. Even after development, can you overwrite the existing keys with the new copy? Yeah, you should be able to. Let's change content here, push it to Localize. I think depending on what settings you've got here, that's going to either update or add a new key to Localize. So I made that change. Let's find that specific key. It's called sign up. Oh, I need to refresh. I think if I had the right settings, it would have updated this in Localize. It hasn't here, but it would do. There it is. So it changed my original key with the same. Cool. And I want to check that that new key was added. It's not quite pulled in yet. Well, I can force this pull because it does happen every so often, but we can just pull that content in manually. I think even those pull requests took a little while. One thing that also is useful is to see, yeah, you could see that process happening. Anything that's happening in Localize, you can see through the activity monitor as well. But if I refresh this page, you'll see that this key that I added in the file was pulled in and it was translated into all of these languages too. And we can just go ahead and create the task as we did earlier. As I said, anything that happens in Localize can be automated using the APIs. So even just the creation of tasks, this can be done by just using a script that runs and creates a task, hits the create a task endpoint and creates a task with all of those parameters that we chose manually. And yeah, we can use our API for this, but keep your eyes peeled for making this even easier. But that's everything that I wanted to show in this demo, which is good because we've got 14 extra minutes for the Q&A if you do want to ask any additional questions. I know we had a few that came in, but if you've got any more questions, it would be great to hear them.
There's one in the chat, actually, Joe, from
Okay.
Michelle.
Is it better to label the text layers in Figma with the actual context, such as sign up, or would using more generic labels like title work as well? Can Localize identify what the text content is for my title? I mean, you can label them with however you want to. What's good is, as I showed you, when we select the keys, we do have, obviously for those that I've already created, it can't let me edit them. But if I disconnect from this project a second and start again, we can change our key naming pattern to something less automated. But if we want to, we can change the key name to whatever is useful for you. Yeah. I think this is one of the more difficult things to kind of sell, is the key naming. The key naming always causes a bit of confusion at first for any new customers using this workflow. Yeah, it is something that comes up, but yeah, you can call things whatever you want as long as it's obvious, like what the developers are going to be working with and the translators are going to be working with. I also saw, I don't think a dev would allow us to edit their repository. Yeah, they would definitely be included in this process as well. We've been taking this from the design perspective today, but yeah, obviously loop in the developers, make sure they know. They would be part of the process too, right? Because as I showed you, maybe there's a notification that isn't in the design. Developers are always going to be within this this process, and this is no different even using the Figma integration. Sorry if I've missed this. I believe there was a similar question. If I change a source language text after the translation and review work into my other locales, what will happen to the status of the other languages? Will Localize tell me that these might need to be translated and reviewed again? A great question. Yes, it absolutely will. Let's go back to that key that we saw earlier that we changed, which was this one. We made a change to the source, and therefore it changed the status of this key for all languages to unverified. So if we were going to be using what I used earlier, or even if we automate it, if we use the parameters for the task creation only to include unverified keys, it's always going to be included in that translation task. So as I suggest, use the unverified so that everything is picked up for all languages. This isn't the only way to use Localize. The good thing about Localize is that it is very flexible. This is obviously been a focus on using Figma in the workflow or a design tool. I focused a lot on Figma today, but we have other design tools like Adobe XD integrations and Sketch integrations as well, which basically work in the same way as the Figma integration does. But yeah, there's multiple different ways of using Localize. This is just one of them. This is just a fraction of all of the different functions and the functionality of Localize. It can go a lot deeper, but we focus mainly on this and today. And yeah, I think this would be a good place to stop. If I have missed any questions in the chat, or if you do have any more questions, please reach out to me. You can also use our support team. If you go to our website as well, you can take out a free trial of Localize if you're not already using Localize. So try it for free. You can, yeah, without, I think even without any information, credit card information, you can take out a trial. Give it a go, see how you like it. I think you'll like it, especially the Figma design led localization workflow. Thanks a lot to Brittany as well in the background. Yeah, helping answer questions and prompt me whenever I needed to. Thank you all for joining, and yeah, I appreciate every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And I am actually launching a quick poll. If anyone cares to leave their feedback on how this session went, we would greatly appreciate it. And I bombarded you all with a ton of links in the chat for demos, customer office hours, and some of our design tools. So feel free to check those out. If you don't have time to open those links before you leave, I will also send a follow-up email with all of the important resources that you will need, including the recording of today's session. Thanks a lot, Joe, for all of your support on this session and for helping everyone out.
Thanks, Britt. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.